The champagne glass shattered across the airplane floor, the crack of splintering glass erupting like a small explosion that made every nearby passenger fall silent. Ethan Walker stood in the middle of the cabin, his polished Armani suit radiating power, yet his eyes reflected confusion and quiet injustice. "Sir, we need you to step off the aircraft immediately," a security officer said, his stern voice laced with hesitation. Behind him, a white passenger smiled with smug satisfaction, as if claiming something that was never his to begin with, the first-class seat that rightfully belonged to Ethan. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. No sound existed except the faint murmur of the cabin, the curious eyes of passengers tracking his every movement. Ethan felt a current of humiliation run down his spine, his heartbeat pounding against his ribs. Yet beneath the anger, something stronger was awakening, a calm resolve, the unshakable belief that real power did not come from how others saw him, but from everything he had built with sweat, intellect, and relentless determination. Ethan Walker, 45 years old, CEO of SkyTech Solutions, a $2 billion AI security corporation he once launched from a garage in South Chicago, knew all too well what it felt like to be underestimated because of his skin, his appearance, or his clothes. And he knew what it felt like to carry real power that others had never learned to see. His success, his Harvard degree, his features in Forbes had never been enough to erase that prejudice from their eyes. But today, he was no longer just another black man. In their perception, he was a man the entire tech industry respected, facing open disrespect in public. Bright cabin lights glinted against his suit, scattering golden reflections from the airplane window, but none of it softened the storm rising inside him. He stepped toward the man occupying his seat, a middle-aged passenger named Gregory Bennett, hunched over a laptop, a flashy luxury watch gleaming on his wrist. "Excuse me, but this is my seat," Ethan said, his voice calm, yet sharply edged each word, cutting through the thin layer of false authority Gregory believed he commanded. Gregory barely raised an eyebrow. He gave the ticket a quick glance and scoffed. "No, this is my seat," he replied with disdain, not even bothering to check the boarding pass. His arrogance tightened the cabin air. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some confused, some irritated, yet none brave enough to intervene. A flight attendant, Melissa Baker, stepped in cautiously. "Sir, are you sure there isn't a mistake? First class has already completed boarding." Ethan lifted his boarding pass to the scanner, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not mistaken. This is the seat I booked 3 weeks ago." The narrative slowed, and Ethan's internal weight spilled into the moment, the exhaustion of constantly having to prove himself, the memories of being followed in upscale stores, the skeptical looks from investors who preferred speaking to his white colleagues, the times neighbors called the police when he moved into his high-end neighborhood. Each memory was a brick that built his resilience, yet today the humiliation pressed on him all at once, making the sky feel like it might collapse onto his shoulders. But then the plot twist emerged. Ethan was not an ordinary passenger. People saw a well-dressed man in a refined suit, but they had no idea he was the mind behind a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, built from nothing, one of the highest-ranking black CEOs in Silicon Valley, a man whose decisions shaped global business conversations. That power lived within him, quiet but ready to ignite like lightning. Ethan pulled out his phone and turned on the camera. Every second he recorded captured the contempt in Gregory's face, the hesitation of the staff, the murmured reactions of surrounding passengers. No shouting, no rage, only a calm observer collecting evidence, turning silent authority into something undeniable. His loyal assistant, Hannah Lee, received the message, "We have a situation." Her voice trembled with concern, yet held deep trust. Ethan had proven many times that he did not need media spotlight or praise to define his power. With a single tap, the video uploaded to social media without a caption. Pure footage exposed prejudice, and instantly a storm of reactions began to erupt. Passengers glanced around, some confused, others suddenly recognizing Ethan from Forbes, while many simply watched, unsure of what was unfolding. The sight was jarring, a poised black man in an expensive suit being asked to leave a first-class seat he had paid for, while a white passenger lounged in it smirking. The pace quickened as security approached and ordered Ethan off the plane. He remained composed, continuing to record his emotions, a maze of anger and clarity. Passengers whispered, a few raised their phones to film, yet no one stepped forward to defend him. Gregory stayed seated, his arrogant smile unshaken, unaware that real power did not come from occupying a first-class seat, but from what Ethan could do next. The moment reached its peak as Ethan was escorted off the plane, each step carrying the tension of accusation, each stare reflecting the weight of systemic bias. Yet inside him, there was no shame, only conviction. He had power, he had data, he had strategy, and he knew this moment was not an ending, but the beginning of an industry-wide reckoning. At the end of part 1, Ethan's footsteps echoed through the airport hallway, blending with the soft rumble of unsettled passengers behind him. Looking back, he reminded himself that this was never about a seat. It was a symbol of dignity, value, and true power, something no one could take from him as long as he stood his ground and acted with purpose. The 37-second video Ethan had just uploaded began spreading across social media like fire in the night. No caption, no commentary, only the image of a well-dressed black man being escorted out of the first-class seat that rightfully belonged to him, while a white passenger remained seated comfortably, the trace of a mocking smile still lingering on his face. Within minutes, the view count surpassed 10,000 each view, like a crack of thunder, trembling through the community and igniting a long-suppressed fury. Hannah Lee stared at the stack of screens on her laptop, her hand, trembling eyes widening. "Ethan, the video is exploding. CNN, SNBC, Fox News, they are all calling." Ethan remained composed, but inside him, the storm of power was beginning to move. He was not afraid. He understood that this was more than an individual incident. This was an opportunity to expose the truth. A moment of personal injustice could become the spark that illuminated an entire industry. Comments flooded social media at a blistering pace. Some users voiced support for Ethan, sharing their own experiences. "I have been questioned flying first class, too. Flying while black." Others expressed outrage at the airline staff's indifference. The tension rose as Atlantic Airlines stock began to shake. In just 30 minutes, the price dropped 3%, leaving the company's executives stunned. In the high-rise office of Atlantic Airlines, CEO Richard Hamilton, 55, was startled by the non-stop ringing of his phone. One alert, then an email, then a call from the PR department. "What happened?" A black passenger removed from his first-class seat, Hamilton demanded, his voice tightening. His assistant responded firmly, "Sir, it turns out he is Ethan Walker, CEO of SkyTech Solutions, a billionaire tech leader." Hamilton's jaw dropped. A storm he had never imagined was now crashing down on them. Meanwhile, Ethan and Hannah set up a small command center, right there in the airport, monitoring every reaction on the internet. Each video, each comment, each share was an arrow aiming straight at the truth that had been hidden for far too long. Then a new twist emerged. Another video recorded from the economy cabin surfaced, revealing even more. Ethan was no longer just the man who was mistreated, but a living, breathing piece of evidence of systemic bias. Gregory Bennett was clearly in the wrong. The flight attendant had pushed Ethan aside, and the captain had approved the removal without a single warning or reasonable explanation. Ethan's emotions shifted from anger to resolve. This was no longer about personal humiliation. This was a chance to create change. He called SkyTech's legal team and ordered them to prepare every piece of data and evidence. Hannah opened a dashboard of the view count, and in just 1 hour, the video had surpassed 500,000 views. The public was paying attention. Everything now was proof momentum, a battlefield for fairness and transparency. At the same time, in Atlantic's corporate office, Jason Nguyen, 28, an Asian-American data analyst, froze in front of his screen. The data he had extracted from Atlantic's internal algorithms showed a clear pattern. Black passengers were flagged for additional scrutiny, far more often when flying first class, even when their travel history, reward status, and profiles were identical to white passengers. Jason knew that reporting this to management would likely be ignored, but a part of him understood that staying silent would only preserve the injustice. He sent all the data anonymously to Ethan Walker. The pace slowed as Ethan reviewed the files. Black passengers were flagged 8 times more frequently than white passengers, Asian passengers 3 times more. Middle Eastern passengers 12 times more. This was no longer subjective frustration. This was algorithmic discrimination, a system designed to normalize unfairness hidden behind the mask of premium customer service. Ethan took a long breath, a surge of tension and excitement filling his chest. This was the battle that could transform the entire industry. Other airlines began to react. Delta tweeted, "First-class service must be for all eligible passengers." Respect. United offered Ethan complimentary first class for his next trip. But Ethan didn't care about personal compensation. He saw something far greater, the chance to turn a moment of injustice into a demand for transparency, to turn data into power. Hannah spoke urgently. "Ethan, they are all waiting for your response. News networks, reporters, everyone is circling around one man." Ethan smiled, his eyes sharpening with vision. "We will not just react, we will transform. Not just a seat, not just an airline. This entire industry must be held accountable." The climax surged as more anonymous emails poured in. Former and current employees shared stories of daily bias. An AI software Ethan had developed for SkyTech, originally designed to detect bias in security systems, was suddenly deployed to analyze customer service patterns across thousands of flights, detecting discriminatory behaviors hidden in the data. Each number, each graph, every pulse in the analytics merged into one conclusion. This was not an isolated incident. This was a system, and that system was being exposed. The narrative slowed as Ethan looked out through the window of the Atlanta airport. Sunlight reflected off the tall buildings, but inside him, a different horizon was forming, one of transparency, fairness, and change. The humiliation he endured on the plane had become the foundation of a powerful movement called Equal Skies, a bold proposal to establish transparent standards across the airline industry, combating discrimination and empowering every passenger. At the end of Part 2, the pace remained intense. Social media roared, the press sounded the alarm, Atlantic Airlines stock plummeted. Yet Ethan stayed calm. He understood that real power did not come from money or a first-class seat, but from the ability to turn injustice into opportunity, from the courage to reveal the truth, and from the determination to turn a moment of helplessness into an industry-wide revolution. He turned to Hannah, his voice steady and resolute. "We are going to change the way this entire industry operates, and no one can stop us." The high-rise executive office of Atlantic Airlines had suddenly become suffocating. Every phone was buzzing, emails flashed non-stop, and computer screens overflowed with plunging stock numbers and a skyrocketing surge of video views. CIO Richard Hamilton, 55 and normally confident and composed, now stood rigid with tension, eyes wide, his hand gripping the edge of the table. What happened? A black passenger removed from his first-class seat, he asked, his voice breaking under the weight of the chaos. His assistant quickly explained, "Sir, he turned out to be Ethan Walker, CEO of SkyTech Solutions. The video was just shared and is spreading nationwide. We are facing an unprecedented media firestorm." Hamilton's mouth fell open as the sense of all his power and reputation crumbling before him hit like a shockwave. He looked around the room where senior executives scrambled in panic, their eyes filled with fear and suspicion toward one another. Inside the airplane cabin, what had started as whispers now played back like a living documentary. Gregory Bennett's smug grin, the hesitant eyes of the crew, the spreading murmurs among passengers. Every tiny detail had become evidence, every frame of the video an arrow aimed directly at the credibility of Atlantic Airlines. Hamilton urgently called for an internal crisis meeting. People crowded into the conference room where white light reflected off charts, data screens, and vibrating phones. Brian Mitchell, the supervisor who had appeared at the boarding gate, stood awkwardly unsure where to begin. Victoria Simmons, the gate agent, nodded nervously, guilt mixing with fear. PR managers and legal advisors gathered in a circle trying to draft statements, but every attempt was crushed by the speed of the digital wildfire Ethan now controlled. Meanwhile, Ethan and Hannah had created a small command center in Atlanta, tracking each view, comment, and post across social platforms. Every share triggered a chain reaction. Every comment revealed the public's growing anger. There was no shouting and no need for noise. The power came from data from the networks, from controlling the narrative. Ethan watched every development calm, but with a pounding heartbeat. This was a historic moment, a chance to flip the balance of power. At the same time, Jason Nguyen, 28, a data analyst at Atlantic Airlines, sat in front of his screen with trembling hands. The data he had extracted from the airline's algorithm exposed a frightening truth. Black passengers flying first class were subjected to enhanced scrutiny 8 times more often than white passengers, Asian passengers 3 times more often, and Middle Eastern passengers 12 times more often. Each statistic was a bullet aimed at the concealment Atlantic's leadership had maintained for years. Jason knew an official report would be buried. Still, he chose to send the data anonymously to Ethan Walker, empowering the man who had experienced the injustice firsthand. The narrative slowed as Hamilton stood at the center of the room, his voice strained, his fist clenched against the table. "How did we let something like this happen?" he demanded. But no one dared answer. They simply exchanged uneasy glances, fear filling the air. PR staff whispered ideas for half-hearted statements, hoping to soften the damage without acknowledging systemic failure. But Ethan's video had created pressure that could not be ignored. The AI-generated data and footage from the economy cabin made it undeniable. This was systemic racial bias. Richard Hamilton stared at the stock chart on the screen as it plummeted, almost $1 billion wiped out in just a few hours. Major corporate clients were calling, threatening to end partnerships. Social media flooded with hashtags like Flying While Black and Boycott Atlantic, overwhelming any attempt to contain the crisis. Calls from journalists piled up, forcing Atlantic Airlines into a corner. Meanwhile, Ethan remained steady as he monitored everything. With each viral surge, each message from internal whistleblowers, he added another brick to his strategy. This was never about a first-class seat. This was about the system, about exposing bias, about seizing the opportunity to demand industry-wide fairness. Hannah pressed Ethan. "Everyone is waiting for your response. We can make real change, but we need every piece of evidence ready." He nodded, eyes firm. "We are going to turn this moment into a movement, not just one airline, the entire American aviation industry." The pace quickened again as anonymous emails flooded in. Former and current employees revealed daily patterns of discrimination. A flight attendant sent a private clip showing staff imposing excessive ticket checks on black passengers while ignoring white passengers with identical travel histories. Ethan archived everything and forwarded it to legal and data teams. Each piece of evidence added weight to the statement he would soon make. The climax intensified as Hamilton ordered an emergency meeting with all senior leaders. Screens around the room displayed Jason's leaked data, showing black passengers routinely denied pre-flight drinks, subjected to strict boarding pass inspections, and treated with colder service while white passengers were favored. The room fell silent, no one daring to challenge the data. Hamilton felt the foundation of his authority crumble. He had never imagined that the man dismissed and escorted off a plane could expose the entire system so completely. Ethan, watching from a distance, kept his heartbeat steady and his mind sharp. This was a silent war, more powerful than any physical confrontation. Public humiliation, viral media, algorithmic evidence, and whistleblower testimony had become a barrage of arrows pointed at the heart of Atlantic Airlines. He did not need to shout or threaten. Power lay in preparation, in data, in narrative control. The pace slowed as PR teams, legal advisors, and internal managers exchanged weary glances, finally recognizing that this was no longer about a single incident. The system, the algorithms, the company culture had been exposed. Everything they once relied on to hide bias had now become proof against them. Hamilton faced a bitter truth. The moment Ethan was escorted from his first-class seat, once dismissed as a minor inconvenience, had now become a storm that swept through the entire corporation, destroying its reputation and market value in mere hours. Part 3 closed with an urgent rhythm as Ethan stood outside the conference room, eyes fixed on his laptop, tracking every move Atlantic Airlines made. Every step, every phone call, every social media comment was under his watch. The plot twist remained undeniable. The man underestimated and forced from his seat was now the one holding the real power, turning humiliation into strength, transforming a personal moment into the catalyst for change across the entire airline industry. Ethan Walker sat in a temporary conference room inside the SkyTech Atlanta office, the glow from his laptop screen illuminating his face. The view count on his video climbed at a staggering pace, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million. Each increase was like a powerful heartbeat, forcing the entire American aviation industry to pay attention. Ethan picked up his phone and checked his messages. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News tech reporters financial outlets, all requesting a comment. But he said nothing. Strategic silence was his first weapon. Hannah Lee stood beside him, her hands trembling, but her eyes filled with conviction. "Ethan, they are waiting for your response. Everyone wants to know what we will do next." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, inhaled deeply, then opened them. "We are not just reacting. We are transforming. We will turn this moment into an opportunity to change the entire industry. This is not just about a first-class seat, not just about Atlantic Airlines. This is systemic." Immediately, the legal and data analysis teams began working. Jason Nguyen, the anonymous data analyst who had sent the previous files, continued providing spreadsheets and charts showing how many passengers were flagged based on skin color, nationality, and travel history. The numbers revealed that black first-class passengers were scrutinized 8 times more than white passengers, Asian passengers 3 times more, and Middle Eastern passengers 12 times more. Every piece of evidence was assembled into a clear visual system designed to prove institutional bias. At the same time, more viral videos surfaced across social media. One passenger had recorded the entire incident from the economy cabin, capturing Gregory Bennett taking the wrong seat flight attendant, Melissa Baker, ignoring Ethan's legitimate requests, and the captain approving the removal without justification. Ethan watched every frame repeatedly, his gaze cold yet focused. Each image became a building block in the fortress of power he was constructing. The pace intensified as Atlantic Airlines stock plummeted. Social platforms erupted with flying while black and boycott Atlantic, leaving the airline's PR team scrambling. Hamilton realized this was no longer a personal matter, but a full-scale industry crisis, pressured by both the media and the market. Every tweet and every comment struck at the airline's decades-old reputation. Ethan quietly observed everything. He understood the importance of posting videos, sharing data, and gathering testimonies. This was not about revenge. It was about creating a new standard where every passenger received fair treatment, regardless of skin color or background. "Let us build the chance for real change," he told Hannah. "We will create an independent organization called Equal Skies, not only to expose discrimination, but to establish clear, measurable industry-wide accountability." The legal team immediately began drafting documents, preparing charts, statistics, and speech outlines. Every number was verified from ticket history and boarding pass inspections to social media evaluations and anonymous employee reports. Ethan emphasized, "We must prove everything with data, not with words. Every number is evidence. Every chart is leverage." Hannah checked the dashboard, displaying views, comments, and shares. Ethan, in just 2 hours, the video passed 12 million views. Ethan nodded, determination shining in his eyes. "We have their attention. Now we turn it into systemic pressure. We will prove that the problem is not one passenger, but an entire industry." Meanwhile, media outlets began reporting Digital Herald, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, all confirming details from multiple sources interviewing witnesses and former Atlantic staff. Everything aligned. Atlantic's passenger value score algorithm prioritized customers using indirect racial and geographic indicators, and excessive ticket checking was embedded into the system, not a single employee's error. The narrative slowed as Ethan sat alone, gazing out the conference window as sunlight fell across the Atlanta skyline. He recalled every moment he had been followed in luxury stores, every time he was doubted, despite extraordinary success. These bitter memories now fueled his resolve. He understood that standing up today was not only for himself, but for thousands, even millions who had no voice. Hannah pressed again. "Ethan, we have the evidence. We have the data. We have the public watching. We only need to present the strategy." He smiled, eyes bright with inspiration. "Yes. Tomorrow we hold a press conference, not to attack an airline, but to expose a system. We will offer solutions. Equal skies will become the transparency standard of the aviation industry." The pace accelerated as emails, social media comments, video evidence, and AI data poured in. Everything swirled around Ethan like a storm, yet he controlled each factor and each detail. Another plot twist emerged. Current and former Atlantic employees began anonymously submitting data, describing daily discriminatory behavior and indirect directives encouraging staff to scrutinize non-traditional first-class passengers. These reports strengthened Ethan's argument, proving this was not individual misconduct, but culture and system. Ethan stared at his laptop, his eyes focused and his breath steady. "We will not simply react. We will create a new standard. The system must be held accountable. Fairness is not optional, it is mandatory." Hannah nodded, sensing the strength radiating from Ethan's determination and strategy. Part 4 closed with the image of Ethan standing before the screen, overseeing the entire network of data, his heartbeat steady while his mind raced with plans. The press conference, the Equal Skies campaign, systemic evidence, algorithmic analysis, and the network of witnesses. The plot twist remained undeniable. The man underestimated and expelled from first class was now commanding the entire media storm, turning personal injustice into a movement that would reshape an entire industry. The next morning, the conference room at Skytech's Atlanta office had been transformed into a media command center. A large screen displayed the live view count of the viral video data charts from the passenger value score algorithm used by Atlantic Airlines and the growing list of news articles circulating online. Ethan Walker stood at the center of the room, his eyes bright with determination, his voice calm, yet razor-sharp. Today is not about a first-class seat. Today is about the system. A system that has failed to treat black passengers fairly, and we are going to prove it. Reporters from CNN, MSNBC, Digital Herald, and the Wall Street Journal had been invited. They buzzed with anticipation as cameras, microphones, and recorders clicked into place. The flashes illuminated Ethan's face. He did not show anger or raise his voice. Every gesture, every glance, every word was measured, turning a dramatic moment into strategic force. Hannah Lee reviewed the final slides charts, showing the disparity in flagging rates between black passengers and others' data on pre-flight service discrepancies and anonymous employee messages. Ethan stepped to the podium, scanning the room, recognizing the reporters waiting for an explosive reaction. But he was prepared. The silence he had maintained earlier was leverage, and this was the moment to strike. "Everyone, my name is Ethan Walker," he began, his voice calm yet resonant. 2 days ago, I was removed from the first-class seat I had legally purchased. But today I am not here to talk about my seat. I am here to talk about a system thousands of passengers have faced, but no one saw. The first slides appeared comparing ticket flag rates, pre-flight service denials, and data from the PVS algorithm. Reporters froze in shock. The numbers were undeniable. Black first-class passengers were flagged 8 times more often than white passengers with identical profiles. Internal witnesses confirmed that excessive scrutiny was part of the organizational culture, not an isolated mistake. The narrative slowed as Ethan looked toward the conference window, his heartbeat steady. He remembered the moment he was pushed out of his seat, the confusion in passengers' eyes, Gregory Bennett's contempt, and the indifference of the staff. Those memories had now become fuel. He continued. We gathered data from anonymous employees, passengers who experienced similar treatment, and from the airline's own algorithm. This evidence does not simply show unfairness toward me, it reveals a systemic pattern of discrimination. Reporters scribbled notes, microphones, activated eyes glued to the screen, and to Ethan. A journalist from Digital Herald rose. Can you clarify how the passenger value score algorithm works and how it affects passengers? Ethan smiled, his tone calm but incisive. This algorithm quantifies passenger value using indirect factors from travel history and spending to address name and online profile. These factors, intentionally or not, create discriminatory outcomes. Black, Asian, and Middle Eastern passengers are flagged more often, scrutinized more often, and denied pre-flight service more often. This is not an isolated incident. It is systemic. The pace intensified as emails, messages, and video evidence played on the screen. A second video from the economy cabin replayed the entire sequence of Ethan's removal, the flight attendant ignoring his legitimate request, and the captain approving it without question. The sight of Gregory Bennett sitting smugly made the injustice even clearer. Reporters could not look away, their eyes filled with tension and disbelief. Hannah stood beside him and reminded softly Ethan, "Our message must be clear. This is not about one passenger. It is about the entire industry. We need to offer solutions, not just expose the problem." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. We are announcing the Equal Skies Initiative, an independent, transparent, measurable standard designed to ensure fair treatment for every passenger, regardless of race or background." The tension rose as Hamilton and Atlantic Airlines executives watched the press conference remotely through livestream. Their stock dropped another 5% as the data became public. Media outlets tweeted non-stop. Headlines spread rapidly. SkyTech CEO exposes racial bias algorithm at Atlantic Airlines. Social media exploded thousands of comments and shares, amplifying public pressure by the minute. Another plot twist emerged. Atlantic employees began sending anonymous data directly to Ethan. They described daily biased behavior, excessive boarding pass checks, denial of pre-flight drinks, and subtle directives encouraging staff to prioritize white passengers. Their testimonies reinforced Ethan's argument, proving this was not individual misconduct, but a systemic culture. The pace slowed as Ethan surveyed the conference room, the screens displaying live data videos and social media reactions. He could feel the heartbeat of the aviation industry, shifting like a massive ship struck by hidden rocks, shaking its entire structure. He told Hannah, "We have evidence. We have the public. Now we turn injustice into a new industry standard." Reporters fired questions rapidly, but Ethan remained composed, his answers building the foundation of Equal Skies. He explained how the standard would work, daily transparency reports on service by race, gender, and age-independent audits of algorithms and procedures and disciplinary measures for systemic bias. Every detail was delivered with clarity, showing this was not a spontaneous reaction, but a structured movement. Part 5 closed with Ethan leaving the conference room, his eyes firm as he glanced at the screens filled with data and video evidence. He knew this moment would change American aviation. Power no longer rested in a first-class seat or in the temporary authority of the Atlantic Airlines CEO. It rested in preparation evidence and strategic action. Another plot twist stood out clearly. The man once underestimated and removed from his first-class seat was now the center of an industry-wide movement, controlling the narrative and leading the charge toward a new standard of fairness. The Atlantic Airlines headquarters had descended into chaos. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Richard Hamilton, the 55-year-old CEO, but he was no longer the center of power. Emails from the media and the online community, flooded in stock charts, plunged, and corporate clients called relentlessly demanding answers. Hamilton stood in the middle of the conference room, his hand gripping the edge of the table, his breath quick and uneven, feeling the power he had held for years slipping out of his grasp. Around him, the senior leadership team struggled in panic. Victoria Simmons, the 42-year-old gate agent, stared anxiously at the table. Brian Mitchell, the 50-year-old supervisor, stumbled through every question about responsibility. PR staff whispered frantically, attempting to draft statements, but every effort was drowned out by the overwhelming data Ethan Walker controlled. Live footage from the cabin video charts from the PVS algorithm and anonymous employee emails proved this was not an individual mistake, but a deliberate system. Meanwhile, Ethan sat calmly at SkyTech Atlanta, monitoring the rising views, the comment count, and the flood of witness videos from internal employees. Each clip, each share, became another brick in the foundation of the Equal Skies movement, transforming a personal incident into a media and legal storm. He told Hannah with firm conviction, "This is not about a first-class seat. This is about the entire industry. We are going to prove that Black, Asian, and Middle Eastern passengers have been systematically mistreated, and now we turn injustice into transparency and accountability." Another plot twist emerged. Current and former Atlantic employees began sending anonymous data directly to Ethan. They described daily discriminatory practices, excessive boarding pass checks, denial of pre-flight drinks, and subtle instructions prioritizing white passengers. Each testimony strengthened Ethan's argument. This was not individual error. It was organizational culture, a system upheld for years. The narrative quickened as Hamilton called for an emergency meeting with all senior leaders. Screens around the room displayed the real-time data Ethan released: Black passengers flagged more often, reasonable requests ignored by staff, and the captain approving removals without question. No one dared to deny it. Hamilton felt his power collapse. The man he had underestimated and removed from his first-class seat was now controlling the entire narrative. Atlantic's legal experts attempted to craft a statement. An isolated incident under investigation, compensation will be offered. But every proposal fell flat. Ethan had already proven that denying systemic issues was pointless in the face of video evidence and data. PR staff realized they were up against a movement that could not be managed with scripted words or polished apologies. At SkyTech, Ethan and the legal team reviewed every message, every video, every data set. He made a clear decision: he would not accept any personal settlement from Atlantic. The goal was systemic change. "If we accept money, the incident will be forgotten," Ethan told Hannah. "We are here to change the entire industry." PR and legal departments at Atlantic began to understand the severity of the situation. Hamilton stared at the screens displaying social media comments and algorithm data. Black passengers scrutinized 8 times more, often denied pre-flight drinks, treated coldly, all proven by hard numbers. Pressure mounted as internal staff emails were re-examined, exposing even more evidence of institutional discrimination. Ethan continued building the legal strategy. He invited civil rights attorneys and prepared documentation for both a personal lawsuit and a class action case. The objective was to expose discriminatory patterns and force Atlantic Airlines into a complete structural overhaul. Anonymous data from Jason Nguyen and other employees was analyzed, charted, and illustrated, clearly demonstrating that this was a systemic issue, not an isolated event. The narrative slowed as Ethan sat alone, looking out of the Atlanta office window. Sunlight reflected off the skyscrapers, but inside him, a new storm was awakening. He replayed every moment of being escorted from his seat, the curious eyes of passengers, the smug smile of Gregory Bennett. Those bitter memories were now fuel for his resolve, turning a personal humiliation into an industry-wide movement. At Atlantic, Hamilton and his leadership team realized they could not delay any longer. Employee reports, cabin videos, algorithmic data, and public reaction had created unprecedented pressure. Hamilton faced the bitter truth. The moment he once dismissed as a small incident had become a storm that shattered the company's reputation and market value in hours. A new plot twist appeared. Lisa Washington Atlantic's Director of Diversity, who had filed multiple internal reports about bias that were ignored, decided to act. She began supplying Ethan with direct data, including buried complaint records, internal guidelines, instructing staff to scrutinize passengers based on racial assumptions, and internal assessments showing systemic bias. Lisa, long overlooked, had become a strategic ally. Ethan seized the opportunity. He compiled every data set, charted every pattern, and prepared a transparent report for the press conference and the broader legal strategy. Everything was structured meticulously, from personal evidence to algorithmic bias charts and internal employee testimonies. He understood that silence and strategy were the strongest weapons. Every move was controlled, every detail precise, every message clear. Part 6 closed with Ethan looking at the screen, his eyes blazing with determination. The man once underestimated and forced from his first-class seat now held real power, not the power of a seat or money, but the power to transform the entire American aviation industry, to expose the system, and to build the Equal Skies Initiative. The plot twist continued. Yesterday's victim had become the architect of an industry-wide movement, controlling the narrative and leading the way toward lasting systemic change. The next morning, the SkyTech Atlanta conference room glowed under studio lights, fully prepared for the historic press conference of the Equal Skies Initiative. Cameras, microphones, and recording equipment filled the space as reporters from CNN, MSNBC Digital, Herald, The Wall Street Journal, and countless online publications waited in anticipation. Ethan Walker stood at the center of the room, dressed in a sharp black suit, his eyes burning with determination, his calm yet resonant voice carrying across the hall. Today we are not here to talk about a single first-class seat. We are here to address a system that has upheld injustice for years, a system that has affected thousands of passengers, and today that system will be held accountable. Slides appeared one after another, exposing everything. Charts from the passenger value score algorithm, data on excessive boarding pass inspections, statistics on pre-flight service denials, and economy cabin videos capturing the entire incident. The numbers were stark and undeniable. Black passengers were scrutinized 8 times more often, Asian passengers 3 times more often, Middle Eastern passengers 12 times more often. Every data point struck like a blow to the credibility of Atlantic Airlines. The narrative slowed as Ethan recounted his personal experience being escorted out of his first-class seat, the confused stares of surrounding passengers, Gregory Bennett's smug smile, the indifferent attitude of the airline staff. Instead of expressing anger, he emphasized the importance of transparency and responsibility. We gathered data from anonymous employees, from passengers who endured similar treatment, and from the airline's algorithmic systems. This evidence reveals a pattern of systemic discrimination, not an isolated incident. Reporters scribbled notes, microphones clicked on eyes, locked on Ethan and the presentation behind him. One reporter asked, "Can you explain in detail how the passenger value score algorithm works?" Ethan smiled gently. This algorithm evaluates passengers using multiple factors from travel history and spending to address and online profile. These factors, intentionally or not, create discriminatory outcomes. Black, Asian, and Middle Eastern passengers are flagged more often, scrutinized more often, and denied pre-flight service more often. The pace quickened as additional emails and internal employee videos played across the screens. One flight attendant had recorded staff ignoring Ethan's reasonable request, while the captain approved his removal. Gregory Bennett remained seated in arrogant satisfaction, unaware that true power had shifted to Ethan. The economy cabin and social media had become living evidence, revealing systemic bias with absolute clarity. Hannah Lee leaned toward Ethan and reminded him, "This is no longer a personal story. We must present solutions, not only expose the problem." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. Equal Skies will not only reveal wrongdoing, it will define a transparent industry standard. We will measure, monitor, and enforce real accountability. Every airline, every flight, every employee will be responsible to its passengers." The intensity rose as screens displayed real-time reactions from Atlantic Airlines. Their stock fell another 5%, social media exploded with Flying While Black and Equal Skies, and Hamilton, along with Atlantic's leadership, faced unprecedented pressure. Employee whistleblower emails, video evidence, and algorithmic data left them nowhere to hide. Hamilton watched the screens, his face strained as he realized power no longer belonged to him. It belonged to Ethan, the man once dismissed and ejected from his rightful seat. Ethan continued detailing the Equal Skies initiative, transparent reporting of service data by race, gender, and age, independent audits of algorithms and procedures to ensure fairness, training and supervision programs designed to eliminate unconscious bias, public daily reports to create market pressure and hold airlines accountable. The narrative slowed as Ethan acknowledged internal whistleblowers, including Lisa Washington, the diversity director at Atlantic Airlines, who had filed numerous bias reports only to be ignored. Lisa represented the truth that systemic change requires courageous insiders and visionary leadership. Ethan said, "Those who stand up within organizations who provide data and evidence are the key to transforming the system." Reporters recorded non-stop microphones pointed forward. One journalist asked, "What will you do if Atlantic Airlines refuses to cooperate?" Ethan replied with calm resolve, "We will use data community support and legal pressure to hold them accountable. We are not seeking personal compensation. We are seeking systemic change. Every passenger deserves to be treated fairly." The pace surged as social media reactions videos and news articles spread at lightning speed. Reports on systemic discrimination appeared in Digital Herald, The Washington Post, and The Wall Street Journal. The public shared data and personal stories, creating a domino effect. Other airlines began internal reviews, while shareholders and corporate clients pressured Atlantic Airlines to take action. At Atlantic Airlines, Hamilton and his executives realized they had no escape. The system had been exposed, the algorithm, the procedures, the staff behavior. Every strategic move from Ethan and the legal team exerted overwhelming force. Internal employees submitted more confidential documents reinforcing Ethan's case, proving this was not an accident, but a long-standing pattern of discrimination. The narrative slowed again as Ethan stood before the final screen, his eyes bright as he examined the data, the videos and the live view count. He understood this moment would redefine the aviation industry. Power no longer came from a first-class seat or the title of CEO at Atlantic Airlines. It came from the ability to transform personal injustice into a transparent, systemic, and enduring movement. Part 7 closed with Ethan stepping off the stage, his eyes steady, a slight but determined smile on his face. The plot twist was unmistakable. The man once underestimated and forced from his first-class seat had now become the center of industry-wide power, leading a movement for lasting fairness and controlling the very narrative that would reshape the future. The conference room at Atlantic Airlines headquarters glowed under bright lights, yet the atmosphere felt heavy, like a storm about to crash through. Richard Hamilton, the 55-year-old CEO, stood before a massive screen, live-streaming Ethan Walker's press conference, his face pale, his hand gripping the edge of the table. The company's stock had just plunged another 6% following revelations about the passenger value score algorithm and internal employee reports exposing systemic racial discrimination. Hamilton looked around the room where senior executives sat frozen in panic. Victoria Simmons, the gate agent, stared downward, eyes filled with guilt. Brian Mitchell, the supervisor, fumbled with a trembling hand holding a report. PR staff whispered to one another as they attempted to draft a statement. "We will treat this as an isolated incident under investigation," but every word felt meaningless under the weight of Ethan's live data. Every slide, every cabin video, every anonymous employee email reinforced the same truth. This was not an individual mistake, but a deliberate system. The pace quickened as Hamilton tapped the table, his voice shaking. "How did we let something like this happen?" No one spoke. Pressure filled the air like a tidal wave, consuming the room. The legal and PR directors realized they could no longer control the narrative with apologies or vague explanations. Ethan's press conference had ignited a movement for transparency and accountability, turning a personal incident into industry-wide pressure. Meanwhile, at SkyTech Atlanta, Ethan Walker and his legal team continued analyzing data organizing evidence and constructing a legal strategy. Every economy cabin clip, every whistleblower email, every statistical breakdown became another building block in the fortress of power he was assembling. Hannah Lee, his loyal assistant, reminded him, "Ethan, we already have the community, the data and the evidence. All that is left is presenting the legal strategy." He nodded. "We will not accept personal compensation. We are here to change the entire industry. The system must be held accountable." At Atlantic Airlines, senior executives began reviewing internal data. Jason Guyen, the analyst who had anonymously sent documents to Ethan, had warned that black first-class passengers were flagged over 8 times more often than white passengers and staff were trained to scrutinize based on biases. Hamilton stared at the numbers, feeling his power collapsing. The moment he ejected Ethan had now become a media and legal storm they could not contain. The narrative slowed as Hamilton convened an emergency meeting with top executives. "We need a strategy," he said, his voice tense. "One incident should not cause this level of damage. We must regain control." But every proposal was crushed by data, by video, and by overwhelming public reaction. PR staff finally admitted they do not believe empty statements anymore. The community, the media, and shareholders are scrutinizing every step. A new internal plot twist emerged. Lisa Washington, the director of diversity, who had filed numerous bias reports over the years, only to be ignored, stepped forward. She provided historical data on buried complaints, internal guidelines instructing staff to prioritize white passengers, and service evaluations revealing systemic discrimination. Lisa's involvement changed everything. Crucial internal information now belonged to Ethan, strengthening his legal strategy beyond anything Atlantic could anticipate. The pace accelerated as Hamilton gathered the entire leadership team to review Ethan's data, the charts, statistics, and anonymous employee messages exposing a system-wide pattern. Hamilton felt his power slipping completely. The man he once dismissed and forced out of his first-class seat now controlled the entire media and legal storm. At SkyTech, Ethan prepared legal filings for both a personal lawsuit and a class action case. The goal was to force Atlantic Airlines into full reform, algorithm transparency, and systemic accountability. Data from JSON internal employees and cabin videos were compiled into scientific reports, proving systemic bias beyond dispute. Ethan reminded Hannah, "We are not doing this for a personal settlement. We are doing this to change the system." The narrative slowed again as Ethan looked out the Atlanta office window, morning light reflecting across the skyscrapers. Yet inside him, a new storm was only beginning. Every moment of being escorted from his seat, every suspicious glance from passengers, every smug smile from Gregory Bennett had become fuel for a movement that would reshape the entire industry. Atlantic's PR team realized they had no escape. The system had been exposed, the algorithm, the procedures, the staff behavior. Every step Ethan and the legal team took was direct pressure. More internal employees began providing confidential data, revealing bias patterns spanning years. Hamilton felt the crushing weight of scrutiny as the entire corporation fell under legal and media fire. The narrative slowed once more as Ethan prepared the next phase of his communication strategy, the second press conference, legal announcements, and collaboration with civil rights organizations. Everything was meticulously prepared: personal evidence, algorithmic data, cabin footage, internal employee statements. He understood that true power did not come from a first-class seat, but from the ability to turn personal injustice into a transparent, systemic, and lasting movement. Part 8 closed with Ethan standing at the center of the room, surrounded by screens displaying data videos and live view counts. The plot twist was unmistakable. The man once underestimated and removed from his first-class seat had become the core of strategic power, leading a legal and transparency movement across the entire aviation industry, controlling the narrative, and shaping a future built on fairness. That morning at SkyTech's Atlanta headquarters, the conference room had been prepared to perfection. Studio lights illuminated Ethan Walker in his sharp black suit, his eyes sharp yet composed. Behind him, a massive screen displayed every piece of data cabin footage, anonymous employee emails and charts from the passenger value score algorithm. Hundreds of reporters from CNN, MSNBC Digital, Herald, The Wall Street Journal, and numerous online outlets were ready. A tense yet electric atmosphere spread across the room. Ethan stepped to the podium, his voice resonant. Today we are not here to talk about a single passenger, a single first-class seat, or an isolated incident. We are here to address a system that has upheld injustice for thousands of passengers, many of whom never had a voice. Slides appeared one after another, showing that black passengers were flagged 8 times more often, Asian passengers 3 times more, and Middle Eastern passengers 12 times more, alongside statistics on pre-flight service denials and cabin videos exposing biased behavior from Atlantic Airlines staff. The narrative slowed as Ethan recounted his personal experience being removed from his rightful seat, the curious stares of surrounding passengers, Gregory Bennett's contemptuous smile, and the indifference of the staff. But instead of anger, he calmly analyzed the situation. Those moments were not isolated. They reflect a system that has existed for many years. The data and evidence we have collected prove that injustice is programmed into the procedures and culture of the airline. A reporter from Digital Herald rose. Can you explain in more detail how the passenger value score algorithm works and how it affects passengers? Ethan smiled. This algorithm evaluates passengers based on travel history, spending address name, and online profile. As a result, Black, Asian, and Middle Eastern passengers are flagged more often, scrutinized more thoroughly, and denied pre-flight services, while other passengers with identical profiles are prioritized. This is systemic bias, not a personal incident. The pace quickened as additional videos and emails from anonymous employees appeared on screen. Staff ignoring reasonable requests, the captain approving Ethan's removal, and the passenger who took his seat, sitting smugly without consequence. Reporters could not look away, cameras flashing microphones, capturing every word and every reaction. For the first time, data video evidence and internal testimony combined into a complete picture of systemic bias in the aviation industry. Hannah Lee stood beside Ethan and emphasized, "This is no longer a personal incident. We must present solutions and create a new standard for the industry." Ethan nodded. Exactly. The Equal Skies initiative will not only expose wrongdoing, but establish a transparent, measurable, and accountable system for the entire industry. Every airline, every flight, every employee will be required to comply. The climax intensified as Atlantic Airlines' internal data was made public. Employee reports, whistleblower emails, and covert audit findings showed that discriminatory practices had been maintained for years. Hamilton and the Atlantic leadership watched the live stream in shock, their stock dropping another 5% as the online community erupted with the hashtags Flying While Black and Equal Skies. Hamilton realized that the moment Ethan had been escorted from his first-class seat had transformed into an industry-wide legal and media storm that could no longer be silenced with apologies or vague statements. An internal plot twist emerged as Lisa Washington, the Director of Diversity at Atlantic Airlines, stepped forward with additional data on ignored complaints, biased screening instructions, and reports revealing how deeply discrimination had been embedded into company culture. Her involvement strengthened Ethan's legal position, turning internal documents into undeniable evidence. The narrative slowed as Ethan explained how equal skies would operate. Transparent reporting of service data according to race, gender, and age. Independent audits of algorithms and procedures. Public daily reports to create market pressure and accountability. Employee training and supervision to eliminate unconscious bias. Reporters continued firing questions. "What will you do if Atlantic Airlines refuses to cooperate?" Ethan responded. "We will use data community support and legal pressure to hold them accountable. We are not seeking personal compensation. We are seeking systemic change. Every passenger deserves fair treatment." The pace intensified as social media comments, additional videos, and articles spread rapidly. Major outlets reported on systemic discrimination at Atlantic Airlines, and the public shared personal stories, creating a domino effect. Other airlines began internal audits, while shareholders and corporate clients placed direct pressure on Atlantic Airlines to respond. At Atlantic Airlines, Hamilton and his leadership team realized there was no escape. The entire system had been exposed. The algorithm, the procedures, the staff behavior. Every decision was now under scrutiny from the public, the media, and the law. Internal employees continued to send more whistleblower data, reinforcing the conclusion that this was a systemic pattern lasting for years. Hamilton felt unprecedented pressure. The company was on the brink of a full-scale crisis. The narrative slowed again as Ethan prepared the next steps, a legal press conference collaboration with civil rights organizations and plans for independent audits. Every piece of evidence had been meticulously organized: cabin videos, algorithm data, internal employee emails. He understood that true power did not lie in a first-class seat or the temporary authority of the Atlantic Airlines CEO. It lay in the ability to turn personal injustice into a transparent, lasting, industry-wide movement. Part 9 closed with Ethan standing before the massive screen eyes, burning with determination as he examined the live data and video feed. The plot twist was unmistakable. The man once underestimated and forced from his first-class seat had now become the center of strategic power, leading a legal and transparency movement across the aviation industry, controlling the narrative and shaping a long-term standard of fairness. Every eye was now on him, but true power had already shifted into the hands of Ethan Walker. 3 weeks after the press conference, the headquarters of Atlantic Airlines felt like a silent battleground. The executive meeting room was filled with screens showing data, algorithm charts, whistleblower emails, and stacks of legal reports. Richard Hamilton, the exhausted CIO, stood before one of the displays, his hands trembling. The company's stock continued to plunge, and the pressure from the media, the public, and the shareholders had not eased for a moment. There was no choice left except change. At that moment, Lisa Washington, the director of diversity, walked into the room. She, who had been ignored for years, had now become central to the restructuring strategy. Lisa looked at Hamilton and the leadership team. "We cannot delay any longer. The data and evidence from Ethan Walker and our internal employees have proven systemic discrimination. If we do not change, this company will not survive." Hamilton fell silent, realizing that the power and reputation he had held for so long were collapsing entirely. The narrative slowed as he felt the weight of pressure from the company, the media, and the community. Every decision was being watched. This was no longer a personal matter. It had become an industry-wide reckoning where one wrong decision could erase billions in market value. At SkyTech Atlanta, Ethan Walker and his legal team monitored every movement. Hannah Lee stood beside him and emphasized Ethan. Now is the time to ensure that Equal Skies is actually implemented. We have created pressure. Now we must prove results. Ethan nodded, his eyes steady. We will not just change Atlantic. We will establish a transparent, measurable, and accountable standard for the entire industry. Every airline, every flight, every employee will be held responsible. In the following days, Atlantic Airlines began rolling out a series of reforms. Hamilton and Lisa, along with the legal team, established an independent audit system to ensure the passenger value score algorithm no longer contained bias. They launched daily transparency reports showing service quality by race, gender, and age. Employees were retrained to identify and eliminate unconscious bias with strict monitoring measures in place. The pace quickened as shareholders and corporate clients observed the reform process. Suspended contracts began to resume, not because of past reputation, but because transparency and accountability were finally being demonstrated. The media tracked every step, publishing articles about Atlantic adopting the Equal Skies standard and undergoing comprehensive restructuring. At SkyTech, Ethan Walker monitored everything closely. Each new dataset from Atlantic, every employee report, and every response from the online community was collected. He understood that real power was in the ability to oversee and influence the process, not just the moment he had been escorted from his first-class seat. Hannah reported Ethan, "The public response is incredibly positive. Other airlines are beginning to evaluate their own systems and prepare to adopt similar standards." The climax rose as the Equal Skies initiative was officially announced across the entire aviation industry. Transparent standards, periodic reporting, independent audits, and algorithm oversight were implemented not only at Atlantic, but rapidly adopted by major airlines such as Delta United and JetBlue. Market pressure, media scrutiny, and legal accountability forced everyone to comply with the new standard. The narrative slowed as Ethan looked out the window of the Atlanta office, afternoon sunlight casting against the skyscrapers. He remembered the moment he was forced from his first-class seat, the curious stares of passengers, and Gregory Bennett's contemptuous smile. Those bitter memories had now become fuel for his mission to create a fair and transparent system where no one was judged by skin color or background. Lisa Washington was appointed interim CEO of Atlantic Airlines. She directly oversaw the implementation of Equal Skies, executed internal reforms, and engaged with employees and customers to ensure transparency. Hamilton stepped back, realizing that real power had shifted to those truly capable of leading change. The pace surged again as public reports were released for the first time. Service statistics, algorithm, data, customer feedback, and independent audit results became transparent and available to all, creating pressure across the aviation sector. Other airlines began adopting similar standards, spreading a model of transparency and fairness across the industry. The climax continued as government agencies, including the United States Department of Transportation, began monitoring and proposing regulations for algorithm transparency and service reporting based on the Equal Skies standard. Civil rights organizations and the online community maintained constant oversight to ensure that these standards were not just written, but fully enforced. The narrative slowed once more as Ethan reviewed the data on the screen: video view counts, witness comments, reform reports from Atlantic and other airlines. He understood that true power did not come from a single moment, but from the ability to transform injustice into an industry-wide movement, one that demanded transparency and created long-term accountability. Part 10 ended with Ethan sitting at SkyTech, looking at the screens with a soft yet determined smile. The plot twist remained unmistakable. The man once underestimated and removed from his first-class seat had become the center of power, leading the Equal Skies movement, reshaping the entire American aviation industry, and establishing the foundation for a transparent, fair, and sustainable standard. What had once been a personal humiliation had become a national movement, proving that courage, strategy, and data could transform an entire system.